Hillside Memorial Park, a few miles from Hollywood, lie the mortal remains of Al Jolson, a man who achieved greatness by aiding his fellow men to achieve happiness. He lived in an era during which the entire world was devastated by a succession of merciless wars. Throughout that era of great human travail, he sang, and the spirit that animated his singing inspired those who listened to sing with him, and in singing to keep their hearts open to love and gladness and high ideals. Al Jolson sang frankly sentimental songs in a frankly sentimental way. He addressed them not to the ears of critics, but to the hearts of common men. And now let's turn back the calendar a few decades and trace the career of this great entertainer. Here we see him with the late Mildred Harris at a benefit staged in New York in the early 20s. Al Jolson, by then, was one of Broadway's ranking stars. His enthusiasm for competitive sport in all its varied forms was inexhaustible. Golf, at which he developed more than ordinary skill, was one of his principal hobbies. The birth of the talkies opened a new career for Al Jolson. With Ruby Keeler, then his wife, he came to Hollywood to star in The Jazz Singer. Overnight, he became one of the screen's greatest stars, the peer of Rudolph Valentino, William S. Hart, and Douglas Fairbanks, with whom you see him in this informal shot, filmed more than 2 decades ago. Death has rung down the final curtain for them all now, but their memories will live as long as there is a motion picture screen. In Hollywood, Broadway's favored singer found a sun-drenched, informal way of life that delighted him. And through the newfound magic of the screen, he found a worldwide audience. Popular demand kept him before the camera, starring in hit after hit. But with a pal like Jimmy Durante on hand to help, there still was time for gags and fun. And still time for participation in innumerable benefit performances and charity drives. The Jolsons, Al and Ruby Keeler, were always ready to lend their aid to every worthy cause. In Hollywood, too, Al's passion for sports found ample room for development. At the Santa Anita races, or at the weekly boxing matches in Hollywood Legion Stadium, the Jolsons were regular and enthusiastic patrons. Al, glimpsed here with Conrad Nagel, became a sun hunter and spent much of his leisure at Palm Springs. As the years rolled on, the Mammy singer's popularity, instead of diminishing, grew still more strongly entrenched. After the release of The Jolson Story, a picture based on his remarkable career, the late Sid Grauman summoned him one evening to the forecourt of Grauman's Chinese Theater, where a slab of freshly mixed concrete awaited his signature. Al wrote there the name that he already had written in far larger letters in the annals of show business, just as enduringly in the affections of countless millions of fans. Beside his name in the concrete, Sid Grauman insisted that Al Jolson must leave an even more appropriate, the impression of his knees. A gag? To be sure, it was a gag in one sense of the word, but it was one with meaning. It had been on his knees, pouring out an emotionalism far more sincere than pretended, that Al Jolson first had won the hearts of his listeners. It was his ability to inject sentiment and emotion into his singing that had made him one of the all-time greats of his profession, that had enabled him to give the world an antidote for some of its troubles. For all its stately beauty, the monument erected to him in Hillside Memorial Park speaks no more eloquently to those who loved him than does this square of concrete in the forecourt of Grauman's Chinese Theater. Advancing age, and with it a serious illness, exacted from Al Jolson its inevitable toll. But neither age nor illness was able to quench his spirit. Instead of complaining, he clowned. Instead of slowing up, he looked for new endeavors. Few men ever have been privileged to give enjoyment to so many others. Few have been privileged to find such personal pleasure in living. Al Jolson in his 60s had the same ready laugh and the same optimistic philosophy that had distinguished him as a 30-year-old star on Broadway. His activities continued unabated. Here you see him with Pat O'Brien at a social affair staged to raise money for one of his pet charities. And here at a fundraising banquet hosted by the Friars Club. With him in this scene are Pat O'Brien, Bob Hope, Eddie Cantor, and Louis B. Mayer. As he takes his turn at the microphone is his lifelong friend, Georgie Jessel. Life to Jolson has always been a magnificent show, a heady mixture of comedy and heartwarming sentiment. It was his great good fortune to be one of the most important and most active members of the cast until the very moment of his death. One of Al's last public appearances in Hollywood was made as the guest of honor at a photoplay award dinner. Here to wish him well on the occasion of one of his greatest triumphs is George Jessel. And here, too, is Harry Cohn of Columbia Pictures, who produced the Jolson story. With that picture winning enthusiastic applause wherever it is shown, Al's singing was in greater demand than ever before, and he had decided to undertake a courageous, unselfish project. In September 1950, Al Jolson arrived in Korea to entertain United Nations troops. He knew in undertaking such a tour that his strength might be taxed beyond its limits. But the boys wanted him, and his sense of duty impelled him to go. His enthusiasm would not permit it to be a limited tour of duty. He sang wherever there were soldiers who wanted to hear him. And everywhere he went, homesick men begged for more songs. And more, and more. With him in this scene is General Walker, destined to die a few weeks later in a battlefront traffic accident. Never in his entire career had Al Jolson sung to more appreciative audiences. Never had he expended his energies more eagerly or more recklessly. In Korea, rather than in Hollywood or on Broadway, his career reached its true climax, and he won his greatest success. The strain on his already depleted strength proved to be too heavy, and the price he paid only a few short weeks after his return to the United States was death. It will be long indeed before he and the songs he sang are forgotten.